But the previous speakers have pointed out very clearly the treasures that were at stake in Iran when the president decided to test the proposition that a war crime and attaching cultural heritage was a good idea, which is the reason Sabina brought us together. Until that point, the best images of cultural destruction happened to be the Nazis or the Khmer Rouge, but since the beginning of the end of the Cold War, we have quite a toll of death, displacement, and a vast wasteland of cultural destruction. Now, despite the ups and downs in interest, the spike with Trump's comment, this topic actually comes and goes, and there may be a bit of decent news in the reaction, the outcry against Trump's announced policy, when the commander-in-chief decides to act more like an ISIS thug than the head of the U.S. military. And the U.S. military disputed all of this as well, because whether you like him or dislike him, since the Lieber Code in the U.S. Civil War, the U.S. military has actually made huge efforts when there is no military significance of any cultural site to pay attention and to avoid attacking it. In fact, if you look at the reports after Libya, whether you like that event or not, the targeting, the really specific targeting in Libya avoided really the destruction of virtually all of the important sites. So the good news, it seems to me that there's an opportunity presented to address these issues because it's become more visible in general, once again, these ups and downs, which began, I think, in earnest most recently with Palmyra. But if you go back in time, we had the real-time destruction of the Bamayan Buddhas, which somebody else mentioned, preceded by the destruction of the Mostar Bridge, and in between the libraries in Timbuktu and Yemen, something that Sabina has done a lot of work on. So I think it's important to keep in mind that these are all spectacular targets. In Iran, you've got 24 of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. But in a research project, and with Sabina and Irina, and I saw Glenn Bowerstock here somewhere involved, we're looking also at less spectacular sites. Christian cemeteries in Iraq, or Yazidi shrines anywhere, or Uyghur temples in China, because these, at least for me and for the researchers in this project, are no less important to the communities in which they're located, even though we get a lot more publicity for these sites. So can anything be done? Well, the proposition behind the project and this talk is that, in fact, a lot can be done in the normative and policy arenas to attenuate these tasks on what actually Irina once called cultural cleansing. And the point of departure, actually, with Sabina this evening was Lemkin's proposition that you can't really separate vandalism, or heritage, from barbarity, killing people. And so in the public's mind, actually, with this up and down, it seems to me there's an image that it's linked to mass atrocities, and that's the title of our book, Heritage and Mass Atrocities, because it's intimately linked with mass murder, forced displacement, rape, ethnic cleansing, human trafficking, slavery, and terrorism. And so many governments deplore this, but sort of scratch their heads. We can't really do anything about it. So I'd like to remind folks that the same kind of throw your hands up, oh my God, what can we do, reactions actually greeted the 1990s with civil wars and mass atrocities in Somalia, in the Balkans, in Rwanda, wherever. And at that point, there was an effort, and you can discount these, what I have to say, because I happen to be the research director for something called the International Commission on Intervention in State Sovereignty, in which the commissioners tried to find some middle space when you have state sovereignty saying you can't do anything, and you have the imperative to actually protect people, and I would argue protect heritage as well. You can actually do something. Now, a really talented journalist who works on these two subjects, a guy named Hugh Eakin, basically said, while the United Nations has adopted the responsibility to protect, to allow international intervention to stop imminent crimes of war or genocide, no such parallel principle has been introduced for cultural heritage. Well, I actually don't think we need one. The same kinds of framework that the Commission looked at, namely, you have a responsibility to prevent this destruction, and if you can't prevent it, to react. And if you can't react, which is oftentimes the case, there's a responsibility to protect and rebuild it subsequently. So it seems to me that there's a very, very intimate link between protecting people and their cultures. The talk, I called it a false choice, because I think too many people set them up. Can we protect people? Can we protect heritage? The fact of the matter is you can't separate them. And I think people who try to say there's a distinction between intrinsic value of heritage and extrinsic value, that is, between cosmopolitans who see the value of culture wherever for humanity, and humanitarians who say, well, it's a prelude, virtually almost always a prelude to mass atrocities. There is no need to separate those. I think it's a fool's errand to try to do so. Just as it's a fool's errand, frankly, to try to say we have human beings and we have the human environment. You need clean air, you need clean water, and you need culture for the essentials of life. So there is a huge body of public international law. There are 3 conventions on they're deposited with UNESCO, 54 conventions, 70 conventions, 72 convention. But public international law is not the problem. Political will, or the lack of political will, is. A Princeton colleague, Gary Bass, wrote a history of humanitarian intervention, and he said, we are all atrocitarians now. Now, your word processor will not like that word, but we are all atrocitarians now, but so far only in words and not yet in deed. So we've got the law. We need to mobilize, I'd say, political will to do something about it. So for me, and I'm going to turn it over to Irina here in a minute, protecting immovable cultural heritage is not a distraction for people who wish to protect human beings. It's not yet another crime to add to the responsibility to protect's list of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing. It's a fundamental aspect of protecting all of those. And I think in addition, it would help mobilize more support for people who are trying to protect people. I'm going to close with a quote, can't put it up, but there was a study done in 2016 on the region, including Iran, by the Middle East Institute, the Asia Society, and the Antiquities Coalition. And its conclusion was succinct and apt, at least for our consideration this evening, for Iran at the crossroads. The fight to protect peoples of the region and their heritage cannot be separated. So I'm going to go back to where Sabina began with Lemkin. You can't separate barbarity and vandalism, because murdering people cannot be separated from murdering history, which is why we're here. So thanks.